Alright, now that we've got our radio set up and everything's operating, let's go ahead and check one thing real quick. That's to make sure that when we turn our wheels to the left, that they actually do go to the left. When we turn them right, they actually do go to the right, and that they center back properly. Depending on what radio you're using, again, we use the chart in the manual to show us where to set our reverse and on the servos. So if it's turning backwards, go back and reverse the servo so that when you steer left it goes left, and when you go right it goes right. The next thing that we're going to do is to check the alignment of the front wheels to make sure that that your truck is actually going to go straight when we want it to go straight. So out of the box, we're going to take a look at it, and mine, if you take a look at the front wheels, it's wanting to turn left a little bit. You can see, it might be a little bit hard to see, but my wheels are cocked off to this side, to the left, rather than going directly straight. If you're not quite sure, there's kind of a little trick that I found that I like that will show you not only your alignment is correct, but your toe in or toe out. I've gotten a long straight edge, and this just happens to be a level, but you can use a metal bar or anything that's long and straight. I'm going to set it against the back wheel here, and then I'm going to go across to the front wheel. And you can see that there's a big gap right in here, which shows me that I'm actually turning left. And if I was to do that on the other side, you can see the big gap in the front again, which means I'm turning left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my sub trim on the radio to get this all straightened out and to make sure that we are going in the right direction. So I'm going to put the straight edge up against here, and then I'm going to watch the angle here. And if you look in your directions, this should be 1 degree toe out, which means that there's going to be just a small gap in between the straight edge and the back of the wheel. So I'm going to use my sub trim on my radio, and as you can see, that's straightening out, and there's less and less of a gap there. And I'm going to want about 1 to 2 millimeters of gap in the back, which shows me that I am toed out 1 degree. I'm going to go ahead and check that on the second side, and there is no gap there. So let's go ahead and set the sub trim a little bit more. There we go. Now you can see that there's a small gap here in the front, which shows me that I am about 1 degree toe out. And if I do the other side, you can see that there's about a 1 to 2 millimeter gap there, which shows that I am again at about 1 degree toe out. If in fact you cannot get them even, you're going to set one tire to 1 degree toe out, and then you're going to use your turnbuckle here to set the second tire to match, and that will make sure you go straight. And it's always best to do that at 0 trim. And then to adjust with your sub trim just to make sure that you are moving forward. So I know it's a little bit to digest there, but we just used a straight edge to make sure that we are going straight and that both our toe settings are proper on the front tires. Just a little trick. A lot of times you can also just eyeball it. If you don't have a straight edge available, just set your sub trim until it looks like your tires are going straight, and you'll probably be just fine. But we just get a little bit more accurate than that. Alright, now we're going to, now that we've set the trim and made sure that we're going forward, we're going to revisit the travel setting for our steering servo. So we're going to go back into the travel setting. Let me set my radio to travel here. And what we're going to do is make sure, and this is basically what everybody else calls an end point adjustment. We're going to go to our steering, and we're going to go ahead and turn left. And then we're going to adjust the end point adjustment. We're going to dial it up a little bit to a higher number until the wheels quit turning. Then I'm going to back it off a little bit just until I see movement in the front wheels, which you can just see now. And that's going to make sure that we're not making our servo travel too far. We're going to go ahead and do the same thing on turning the other direction. And again, we're going to raise the number up a little bit until the wheels quit turning. And then we're going to back it off just a little bit until the wheels, you see just a little bit of movement in the wheels. That's going to make sure that we have maximum steering in both directions, and that also you're not taxing your servo by making it try to push against the wheels when they won't turn anymore. And that would be the proper setting for your front end alignment as well as the travel of your steering. Next section, we're going to move to take a look at the throttle and brake servo settings. Okay, we had to zoom in pretty close here. What we're going to do is we want to set it, the throttle, so that when we pull our trigger to the fullest extent, that this unit on the carburetor just touches the carburetor base. And I'll show you what I mean here. Keep an eye on this little unit right here. And as I pull the trigger, it's going to go down and it's going to just touch on the carburetor base. Okay, and that's how you want that set. Okay, you don't want it to go farther and you don't want it to not quite touch. You want it to just touch. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our endpoint setting, or our travel, and we're going to set it into the throttle adjustment area. And we're going to pull our trigger all the way down so that the throttle will just touch. Okay, if it's not just touching, what we're going to want to do is you're going to want to raise up on the throttle. And you can see as I'm moving the endpoint adjustment how that's rocking back and forth. Going to want to slowly rock it down, just point by point or click by click until it touches. Going to go one more past it just to make sure it's not going to move anymore, and then back it off by one. Go ahead and let go of your trigger and test it 3 or 4 times to make sure that it just touches the carburetor body. Okay, we're going to visit one more little part on the throttle linkage setup, and then we're going to move on to the brake linkage. What I want you to do is take a look at the plastic slide right here and the little blue stop. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to loosen up the little adjustment here, and we're going to want to put a gap. Make sure that there's a gap about as wide as your fingernail in between the plastic portion and the stop. It should be about maybe 1/2 to 1/4 of a millimeter. Not very wide, but you do want just a small gap in there. If it's too large of a gap, you're going to have to pull your trigger before the throttle activates. If it's right up against it, then it's going to be instantaneous and it's going to be a little bit too glitchy. So you're going to want to put just a small space in there so that when you pull on the throttle, you can see there's a very small amount of movement there before it actually starts to pull back on the throttle linkage. Okay. Now we set our endpoint adjustment to 50% on the, I think it was 50% on the brake. Actually, we set it to, yeah. So what we're going to want to look at here before we get going is let's take a look at these 2 little brake levers. Go ahead and take a look at them, and if they're cocked off sideways, let's go ahead and loosen it up and straighten it so that they're sitting up straight. It just makes it a lot more accurate, and they both should be at the same angle, and straight is a very good angle to be at. When you're sitting in the neutral position with no brake or no throttle, there should be a gap. If you want to pull back on these two little units, and you want to check, and there should be a gap in between the little plastic ball and the brake lever on both sides. Now the bias on the brakes is set at 60-40, so 60% of the braking in the back, 40% of that power braking in the front. And what that means is that you're going to have a little bit larger gap right here on the front brake than you are on the rear. But you do want to make sure that there is a gap there and that the calipers here are floating and not bound up. Okay? You should be able to turn the wheels and everything should go very smoothly. So go ahead and revisit that. If you need to make any adjustments as far as getting it to just a larger gap on the front than there is on the back, you can go ahead and turn these two units right here to adjust the length of the brakes. You don't want them to be dragging, and you want just a small gap. As you drive the truck, you're going to be able to more accurately set how you want the brake bias for front and rear and how strong you want the brakes. If you have to, you can adjust your travel to make them pull a little bit further if they're not engaging properly. Excuse me. You could hear the diesel out there. We got diesel fumes coming in here. And as you push forward on the brake, you also want to watch this spring over here. And when you push forward on it, that spring should not fully compress. It should be almost fully compressed, but not totally. If you do that, and it's completely compressed, you're going to want to back off your travel. Okay? Hope that makes sense to you. It is fairly straightforward, and as you start playing around with it and read the manual, you'll get it. It's just not that hard.